Welcome to Preservation Oaks, the podcast where we invite you to step away from the bustle of everyday life. Settle in and relax, and take a moment to leave the familiar behind as we explore the hidden gems of America that preserve our cultural past. We call them our Preservation Oaks, and with each episode, we'll journey to a different corner of the country, where we'll discover the unique histories, landscapes, and communities that make up our nation. We'll visit with local museums, historical, and genealogical societies. They are the stewards of these stories. They preserve the legacy of each place like precious pieces of fabric in a quilt that binds the freedom-loving, hard-working people in this country together. So, slow down, grab a beverage, open your mind, and let us take you on a tour of the fascinating histories and heartfelt traditions that lie just beyond the horizon. This is Preservation Oaks, where every story is a stitch in the fabric of our shared culture. Now, join our host, Sean Radcliff, as he uncovers another thread in the tapestry of America's heritage and what it takes to preserve it.
Hey, good day, everyone. Thanks for being here. We have a great program for you. Welcome to Preservation Oaks, where history lives and voices echo through time. I'm your host, Sean Radcliff, coming to you from Salt Lake City, Utah, where this desert valley was carved into a thriving community through grit, sacrifice, and unwavering determination, and where the legacy of those early pioneers still echo in every street, every home, and every life experienced here today. On this episode, we're heading to Lakewood, Colorado, just west of Denver, to visit a place where history doesn't sit silently behind glass cases. It breathes, it surrounds you, and it invites you to step directly into the lives of those who built the communities we know today. This is Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park, a truly remarkable living history museum where the past is not just preserved, it's experienced. Here, historic homes, working spaces, and everyday environments have been carefully preserved and brought together to tell the story of Lakewood and Jefferson County in a way that's authentic, immersive, and deeply human. Set within the natural beauty of Belmar Park, this site is more than a museum. It's a bridge between generations. It's a place where families learn together, where students discover that history is more than dates and names, and where communities reconnect with the stories that shaped them. And guiding that mission are two outstanding leaders. Our guests today are Betsy Bowers, Director, and Katy Lewis, the Curator of Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park. Betsy provides the vision and leadership that keeps this organization thriving as a cultural and educational cornerstone for the Lakewood community and beyond, while Katy brings history to life through thoughtful interpretation, ensuring that every artifact, every structure, and every story resonates with meaning and authenticity. Together they represent the very best of what local history organizations can be, passionate, dedicated, and deeply committed to preserving the stories that might otherwise be lost to time. If you have questions or comments as you listen, send them to preservationoaks@gmail.com. You can find Preservation Oaks on all major podcast platforms, including Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Rumble, and many others. And if you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to like, follow, comment, and share. It truly helps these important stories reach new audiences and supports the incredible work being done by organizations like Heritage Lakewood. Before we continue, a quick clarification for our listeners. In episode 120, DNA Disruption, a listener brought to our attention that we mistakenly referred to Mr. Blaine Bettinger, known as the genetic genealogist, using the incorrect pronoun. To be clear, Blaine is he, and he is one of the most respected genetic genealogists in the field. You can learn more about Blaine and his work at thegeneticgenealogist.com. Okay, and now back to today's episode. We're not just talking about history, we're stepping into it. This is episode 122 of the Preservation Oaks podcast with Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park. Let's begin. Welcome to the program, Betsy and Katy.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I want to thank you so much for being here to tell us about Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park. I'd like to first congratulate you on the 50th anniversary of Heritage Lakewood coming up this August, I understand, huh?
Yeah, we're excited. Katie's done a lot of work for the upcoming exhibit.
Yeah, 50th anniversary plus the 250th anniversary of the country. I bet you're busy.
Yeah, right. Yes, sir.
I got to tell you, this park and museum are just wonderful. You and your community can be very proud of what you're all preserving and doing there in Lakewood. What a fantastic resource for the community. Nice job.
Well, thank you so much. We get a lot of help from the neighbors and the city itself.
Betsy, Katy, Lakewood didn't officially become a city until 1969, which is relatively recent. What does that late incorporation mean for how history is preserved here?
The idea of preservation is so important to the city of Lakewood. Incorporating later in the 20th century, some of those historic structures were lost early on. So the idea of starting a group or a space that could save and preserve that history and interpret it and share it with the public did become a very important piece of our museum that we have today. So what we include at the museum here at Heritage Lakewood that ties in with that history and that late incorporation of the city of Lakewood is the inclusion of 20th century, specifically 20th century history, and an additional focus on recent 20th century history. So the changes in technology that you see, changes in transportation, the impacts of commercial growth, and that really can tap into the community knowledge and nostalgia, offer opportunities for multi-generational learning, because we still have people who grew up with the spaces and places that we have at the park and the history that we have at the park. That more recent history is things that, say, our grandparents or even our parents or we have experienced. Some of the things, the things that we call artifacts at the park, like Viewmasters or Yahtzee, some of the clothing styles. I grew up with that. So it's really fun to see that piece of our history in a museum that you don't always think about as history. And it really pulls on people's heartstrings. It brings out that nostalgia for them.
Yeah, I remember Yahtzee. That was a pretty cool game.
Yes.
Now, you have a lot of buildings there in the park. Many of the buildings in the park are original structures relocated to the site. Can you share how that preservation process worked?
Sure. I'm going to open that question up by saying that it's a huge part of the park, those buildings that have been relocated. They were buildings that were slated for demolition. And so it is especially, I think, wonderful to have found a place like Heritage Lakewood that would preserve them. But I know that preservation practices have really come a long way, and they think differently now about how important it is to preserve a structure in place. But when Lakewood was growing and the area was growing, these buildings were going to be destroyed. And so for us to be able to offer them a permanent home, I think has been super special. And just the process of preserving takes so much time and thought. But I'm going to pass it over to Katy because she has some good footnotes related to the research that went on to make some of these decisions.
Thank you.
Yes. So the basic process we go through with all of the buildings, and I will say the movement of the buildings, that occurred before Betsy and I were here, but we've got great photos and great histories on those. So the buildings are located either by a staff member or someone in the community who realizes the building is going to be torn down, and they contact the city or contact the museum. The buildings are evaluated based on historical research, and if they are a good fit for the museum's master plan and a good fit for the site, then they're moved to our site. And once on site, they're preserved in place as well as we can until funding is allocated or found to do additional preservation work on the building. And we've had really wonderful work that we've done with the State Historical Fund of Colorado, the SHF, they've been able to fund historical assessments on some of our buildings. They've been able to fund analyses that have helped us figure out what style to use for architecture, what paint color to use. And they've also even funded exterior preservation work on the buildings themselves. The Caretaker's Cottage, which is one of our historic buildings on site, is a great example. It's in its original location. It was part of numerous farms and ranches that were on the site, and a caretaker lived there at certain points during its history. And so it was an incredibly long process. SHF funded some of it, the city of Lakewood funded some, and there were assessments done early on. The entire process took about 10 years, and it was a really extensive process. They actually took parts of the building off so that foundations could be poured underneath. The paint was redone with some of the original sections kept so that we could interpret those really early years of the Caretaker's Cottage lifespan. And so really extensive things were done to make that building useful in a number of different ways. And another great example is our gas station, the Peerless gas station that's on site. So it's a 1930s or 1940s gas station. We have it interpreted as 1954, and it's just a small little metal box. And we have some great furnishings in it that talk about 1954. There's gas pumps out front that are 1954 time period. But that building was restored most recently, and we actually call that process a rehabilitation because we didn't have exact records, not like we had with Caretaker's Cottage. We didn't know a lot of the history of the building itself. So we didn't know exactly what it looked like. We didn't know exactly how to remake it in exactly the form that it was, which is more like what you do with a traditional restoration. So that one was more of a rehabilitation where we could change the building up a little bit. We didn't necessarily need to use the exact same types of things that they used to build the building originally because we just didn't know that. We couldn't figure that out. So we did the best we could with the research that was available. And so we worked with a contractor for both of those buildings, and then we furnished those buildings with staff research goes into that. So we figure out exactly what the time period was that we want to talk about and what we want to put in there to tell the building story.
And I guess that was part of my point for asking this question was I wanted the audience worldwide to hear just how much work goes into planning and fundraising, but also once that building is there, you have to maintain it. You know, there's critters that might get in the building. If it's a log cabin, you've got, chinking and bugs and God knows what else, and roofs and paint and so on and so forth. So that when guests arrive at the park and they walk up to this historic building, it looks as good as it can. It's preserved as well as it can from professionals such as yourself.
Yes, absolutely right. Yes, maintenance is a big part of what we do. You have to, just like you said, keep up with the painting, make sure the bugs aren't getting in so that we can keep the buildings for posterity and for the visitors who are coming to see them.
Yeah, and they all look fabulous. I've seen the pictures. They're just beautiful. And I encourage anybody to go on the web and look at Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park and just look at some of the buildings. They're beautiful. Do you guys have a favorite building or exhibit personally?
Well, I'm going to jump into this one. I think all of our buildings are pretty spectacular and each tells a really important part of Lakewood's history. But there's one in particular that I just think the architecture is so unique and special. It's we fondly call it Gil and Ethel's because Gil and Ethel were married and partners and used the building as a barbershop in I think it was 1950s, and they had their workstations or the space of the barbershops were right next to each other in the same building, but they were separated, one side for women and one side for men. So there's that, really special story of the people that made use of the building. And I think Ethel's story is especially telling of a time period. She started out, I believe, as a technician in a hospital, and the doctor that she worked for saw her work ethic and felt like she had a lot of opportunities. And because of the fact that she was Hispanic, it was a difficult time for her sometimes to I think, really make the most of her own professional life. And he suggested that she go into business for herself. And she took that to heart and made it happen. So there's that beautiful story that goes along with this amazing building that has, tiles that are uniquely designed and bring in beautiful patterns. And so I think Gillen Ethels is going to be my favorite building, mostly because of that combination of the story and the beautiful aesthetic it brings to the site.
Yeah, it's a nice barbershop. I've seen those pictures too. Very beautiful. Now, what compelling narratives from Lakewood's history encapsulate its spirit and heritage?
Oh, I'm going to jump in on that one too. I'm really intrigued at the strong women in the community that both built Lakewood way back when, but also even, today. An especially wonderful story is that of the Beers sisters, Betsy, Maddie, Edna, Ollie, and Marguerite, who moved to a farm in Lakewood in 1908. And their parents died when they were still fairly young. And so they ended up starting their own successful dairy farm here in the area the following year. So I love that story. But then too, even, after the city was incorporated in 1969, the second mayor was a woman. And for most of the time the city's been in existence, we've had a female city manager. So I just think women have really brought a lot to this particular community. And I love that about it.
How was Lakewood founded, and what landmark events do you believe have had the most impact on its history?
So we had talked earlier about Lakewood being incorporated as a city in 1969, but we, as the museum, sort of think about the beginning of the use of the word Lakewood in our area, which started in 1889 with its use as a name for a subdivision that is now the central area of what is known as the city of Lakewood. And that area was platted. It was organized and mapped out by Charles Welch and William and Miranda Loveland in 1889. And so we kind of think about that as a little bit of the founding, even though the city wasn't incorporated until much, much later. But we do have some landmark events that are really specific to our area, but also ones that impacted the country nationally. One really specific one is the use in 1909 of the electric interurban, which is the streetcar line, the trolley line, that started running between Denver through Lakewood and into Golden. And that ability to transport people for work, for school, but also just for fun. People would go out to Golden to ride the funicular up the side of the mountain and have picnics, and they would stop in Lakewood for school or work. They would go to Denver for shopping. So that had a huge impact on being able to move people around. Similarly, some more statewide and national impacts. 1910s, 1920s, you saw much more prevalence of the Model T, the Model A. So there were more cars, there were more roads, and especially with World War I, bringing additional people into our area to live, but also for tourism. So you see those impacts across the country. And then the Great Depression, I think, is an interesting time here because one of the things the farmers did to combat the Great Depression in our area was they started turkey farming. Turkeys were a little bit hardier for our area. You could get a little bit more meat from them for eating. And so while the Great Depression, impacted a great area of the United States, there were some really specific things that happened here in Lakewood that's an interesting part of our history. And then finally, the last few, with World War II, an ammunition plant was built in our area, not very far, like a 5-minute drive today from the museum, that was called the Denver Ordnance Plant, on land that was before that simply farmland, ranch land. And it's now the Denver Federal Center. And at one point, it may still be, but at one point it was the largest grouping of federal buildings and employees outside of Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So that brought a huge number of people into our area, really bumped up the population. And then finally, leading up to that incorporation, we saw the impacts of transportation changing once again. Sometimes things come full circle in history. In 1958, US 6 was built, so a major road in our area, and that drew people away from Colfax Avenue, which was really the main thoroughfare. That's where all of the businesses were, the early post office, so many motels, almost 60 motels during the heyday of the motels in the 1950s. And those bigger roads like US 6 and I-70 later on drew people away from that area. So you saw a little bit of a downturn happening in the commercial growth of Colfax. And it's starting an upturn again. The city is really trying to partner with some organizations to add some art to Colfax Avenue to make sure that there's some upkeep on the buildings. So yeah, it's sometimes things come full circle, but you start to see upswings and downturns, and you see those waves come through because of all of these impacts that come either nationally or locally.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different dimensions when you're trying to preserve portions of the community, portions of your heritage. I mean, there's business and climate and community. They all factor into it. History, of course, factors into it. How do the unique traits of your region present both difficulties and potential for preserving its heritage?
It's so interesting you said that. Betsy and I had a discussion about all of those different things. There's so many different ways you can approach this question. We had approached it from climate because we do think that is a unique aspect of our area that physically has an effect on how we do preservation work. So the low humidity in our area in Colorado really offers a lot of opportunities for preservation. You don't see the same level of water impacts and humidity and mold issues that sometimes you see in different areas of the country. But we also have, and I think a lot of the museums and other businesses in the area have recently seen the potential impacts and challenges that go along with the increased fire danger that you naturally see in our area and that we've seen ramp up in the recent years. So that's something we feel like we need to be prepared for. So speaking to encourage other locations and individuals as well to have a plan, have an emergency plan, a disaster preparedness plan, and, really know what is in your museum collection. For us, that's been really important. So we're trying to physically preserve things, but we also work on projects that can, for example, digitize artifacts so that we have them in a virtual space as well. So if things were ever lost, we would still have access to some of that history.
Your park there has 132 acres. Is it heavily forested or brushed? Do you have to clear all that out with regard to fire?
That's a good question.
Betsy may know more about this than I do, but we are 15 acres. The museum is 15 acres of the 132 acre park.
Yeah.
And we work very closely. The city has a parks department, and we work very closely with them. So they do a wonderful job. They take care of all of those pieces. We're not as heavily forested as you see in some of the mountain areas. So there's a really lovely lake, Kuntz Lake, that's in the park that people can walk around. And there are some really wonderful older trees as well. But there's also some open spaces. It did used to be ranch land. So we're not very heavily forested, but of course, fire danger is always a concern. So the Parks Department absolutely keeps up with that work.
Yeah, because it's been pretty dry there in Colorado, hasn't it, this last year?
It has.
Yeah, you're right to worry about that. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
What captivating yet lesser-known narratives about your town does your organization emphasize in its work?
This is a story that Betsy knows I always like to tell. So the Lakewood area has a strong history of farming. I think a lot of times when people think about Colorado, they do focus on the mining history. And that was a very interesting and important part of the history and had a lot of impacts on how people interacted with the native peoples who were there at the time in the 1800s and earlier and who are still here today. But really, the Lakewood area focused heavily on farming and ranching in the 1800s, 1900s, and you still see some of those effects today. There's still people who ride their horses through the park. But a story that we do interpret at the museum is that of May Bonfils Stanton. And she was the heiress to the Denver Post newspaper. One of them. That's part of the story. She and her sister inherited that money, and she moved out to Lakewood because she wanted to start her own farm. She built a fabulous mansion, and here's part of the history of where the name Belmar Park came from. And the name Belmar you see around town in other capacities as well. The Belmar Shopping Center housing area is right across from the museum. But Belmar, it's actually a combination of her name and her mother's name. So her full name was Mary Madeline, and her mother's name was Belle. And so she and her mother had a very close relationship. So she named her mansion, she named her entire estate Belmar after her and her mother.
Oh.
And I always think that's kind of a beautiful story, a remembrance of her family.
That's
and
cool.
That hobby farm really grew. I mean, she had 750 acres in the middle of what is now South Lakewood. And she really grew that hobby farm to include cattle. It included sheep. It included buildings like the caretaker's cottage we talked about earlier. And there's a long history, actually, of people, kind of summering or vacationing out in the Lakewood area. People who included Molly Brown, Margaret Brown, and J.J. Brown.
Oh, yeah.
They had a summer home just south of where we are today. So you see that juxtaposition of the smaller farms, the more subsistence farms that were happening, and also these really big farms, these mansions and these estates. So it's an interesting combination of history for our area.
Yeah, very cool. I remember talking to some historical society back east, and they were telling me that many of the citizens of that town, and I can't remember what that town was, but it was in Illinois somewhere, and they were saying that a lot of the citizens back in the 20s would get tuberculosis because it was rampant in those years. And they would go to Colorado because it was felt that it was a drier climate and it would help them with that disease. Did you see any of that there in your area?
Absolutely. The story that Betsy told earlier about the Beers sisters, their mother had tuberculosis. That was actually why the whole family moved out here. And it was so prevalent in this area, people moving here for the mountain air. There were tuberculosis sanatoriums in Lakewood. There's some south in Colorado Springs. There were some north of us in Wheat Ridge. And the most interesting one that's in our area is called JCRS, the Jewish Consumptives Relief Society. And they started in the early 1900s. And their goal was, because people who didn't have enough money or people of different backgrounds, like folks who were Jewish who were moving to the area, sometimes they were not allowed to go to certain sanatoriums. They were restricted from joining those sanatoriums. And so these folks, it was a group of interested parties who had either cultural or political or medical connections to the Jewish community in Denver. They started a whole sanatorium, and the buildings still exist. It's now part of the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. So there are these beautifully designed buildings on this wide grassy area. When it was a sanatorium, they had a whole farm associated, because part of the idea was that you would have milk and fresh milk, fresh eggs, fresh air, all of these things that could help make you better. But we absolutely saw a number of folks, including the Beers sisters, who moved out here because of those health impacts.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's especially cool that you still have some of that infrastructure from that time still there today. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Yes.
What sparked the creation of Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park, and how did early challenges or successes shape its mission and goals?
Well, I can speak to that a little bit. I know that, as we've mentioned already, the city's still quite young with that 1969 incorporation. And the Lakewood Historical Society formed shortly thereafter with some very committed volunteers in 1974. And the city of Lakewood had some interesting challenges when they purchased the land that Katy mentioned earlier that belonged to May Bonfils. The land came to the city because it was sold after her death. First, it was given in her inheritance to the archdiocese, and they weren't able to really make use of it in the way I believe that May Bonfils had imagined. And so it ended up getting sold to developers, which really put the community up in arms. And at that point, it then was bought by the city, and the land, which is currently where Heritage Lakewood is and part of the larger park, was then became of interest to the Historical Society. They, as I said, formed in 74, and then they opened Belmar Museum in one of the buildings that was original to the site, which we refer to as the calving barn. It was actually, the barn that was on May's property. And that was where the very first exhibits were placed. So the Lakewood Historical Society was really instrumental in bringing this to life. Challenges, I think, around some of there being a very small organization with very large ambitions led to their transferring the museum to the city. They originally had an understanding about their being able to use the calving barn as their space, but they really needed more support. They needed staff and such. So in 1976, it transitioned and, as is the case now, became a municipal museum, which is really very different than a traditional, say, 501c3 museum, because it has the support of the city, but it also has some of the bureaucracy that's tied up in the city. And so I think that we are where we are now, both because of the city, but also because of people like Katy, who are very dedicated and know the importance of the history and how to maintain it.
Yeah. Now, that building that you're in is just absolutely beautiful. I don't know what time period it's from, like the 1950s or something, but it's very cool looking. Were you always in that building?
Oh, great question. Our visitor center, which is a really main part of the site and the space that houses our permanent exhibit as well as our temporary exhibits in the museum store, was actually made to look Art Deco, look mid-century, but it was built and added in 2003. So it's a really nice, I think, complementary building to the site. And it's a great place to start your visit because it gives you the context through the exhibit, the permanent exhibit space. And that space houses a good part of, it houses a few staff members, but in fact, this administrative staff ends up needing to find space elsewhere because although the building looks quite large, it in fact does not have a lot of square footage for office space.
Oh, okay. It is the coolest building. Boy, you guys, 2003, you did a good job on that. Wow. Holy cow.
They did. We're fortunate. Yes.
Huh. Yeah, thank you for that. Now, I'd like to provide the listeners with the contact information for the organization. You can find them on the web at www.lakewoodco.gov/heritage. You can find them on Facebook if you search for Heritage Lakewood. Their phone number is 303-987-7850. You can email them at hlbp@lakewoodco.gov. And their address, and I hope you visit soon, is 801 South Yarrow Street, Lakewood, Colorado, 80226. That all sound right, ladies?
It does, Sean.
Fantastic. Betsy, Katy, it's time for a break for a few minutes.
All right, we'll see you back here after the break.
Thanks, Sean. It's been so fun talking about Heritage Lakewood and really sharing some of the great things that are happening here, but I am ready to take a break.
Thank you very much, listeners. We'll be right back after an important message about visiting Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park. You folks are very lucky to have this gem of a living history park in your town. We'll be right back.
Step into a place where history isn't just remembered, it's experienced. Just minutes from downtown Denver. In the heart of Lakewood, Colorado, lies a hidden gem, Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park. Here, history comes alive. Walk through historic homes, stand inside buildings that once served real families, explore the everyday lives of the people who built Jefferson County from the ground up. This isn't a museum where you just look. It's a place where you feel the past. Set within the beautiful Belmar Park, a 132-acre natural area, Heritage Lakewood offers a perfect blend of history and nature.
Whether you're a history enthusiast, a family looking for a meaningful day out, or simply someone curious about the stories behind the place you live, this is a destination worth discovering. Inside the Visitor Center, modern exhibits connect you to the past in engaging and interactive ways. Outside historic structures tell the story of life throughout the 20th century. Every visit is a journey, so come walk the paths, explore the buildings, and discover the stories that shaped a community. Plan your visit today at lakewoodco.gov/heritage.
Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park, where history isn't just preserved, it's alive.
Welcome to the Genealogy Lab, where curiosity meets discovery. Here's professional genealogist Diana Chrisman-Smith, a seasoned explorer of family histories, uncovering the evidence that connects us across generations. So, grab your notebooks. It's time to enhance your research with this segment of the Genealogy Lab.
Welcome to the Genealogy Lab. Pull up a chair and join me for a bit of curiosity and discovery. Oh, those terrible brick walls. Are they the bane of your existence? They need to go away, right? How did they get there, and what can you do about them? Well, I hate to tell you this, but in my 60-plus years of research, I have learned that most of the brick walls I encounter originated from one source: me. For example, when I assume something about an ancestor, I often throw up a brick wall to researching that person. Or when I don't take the time to read the instructions for a dataset or the introduction to a book, I waste time looking for something that isn't even intended to be there. Or when I don't carefully analyze a piece of information to be sure it's the right person and just add it, I may be creating a false identity. Or when I blindly accept a hint from a database or from someone else's tree, I may be mixing up the people or the fact. You get the idea. If we aren't careful and deliberate in our work, we can cause brick walls to appear or grow. Here are some basic ideas. First, be sure to understand what the source is you are reviewing. Who, what, where, when, and also why. Second, is it relevant to your current research question? Not just about John Smith, but does it answer your question, which today is, who was John Smith's wife? Next, most importantly in my mind, is to critically analyze every source for accuracy, validity, and potential bias. And finally, be sure to review why the record was created. Was it to document it for legal purposes? That's usually a really good reason to believe a record. Or was it to improve someone's image? That's a good reason to be a little dubious. Think of the 1870s mug books. Those county histories were written to celebrate the centennial of the USA. They were written by publishing companies for profit. So they asked the residents of the area for the input and to subscribe. So it was like a door-to-door salesman coming around saying, you can submit a story about your ancestor and a fee, and we'll publish the book and you'll get a copy. Sometimes they even enhanced the information you gave them a little bit. That might introduce some bias, don't you think? These are great hints since they're closer to the time than we are, but consider them just that, hints, until you can find some corroboration. Another factor is the information from a reliable witness. Again, does the evidence answer your research question? And finally, it's very important to compare this new information with what you already have from other sources. And if not, analyze. Is there a logical explanation? If you can see a possible reason for the discrepancy, write yourself a proof summary explaining what you found, where the sources disagreed, and how you believe that discrepancy occurred. Then keep it with the record and note it in your narrative. If you share this with someone, include your explanation so they can understand your rationale. And it's good to encourage feedback in case they have more information to help you. Okay, if you've done all this, what else can you do about your brick walls? My first step is to retrace my tracks. Go back over everything I've researched about this person, family, or event, and verify that I didn't overlook something or mistranscribe a detail. And if you still haven't knocked it down, don't give up. This may be a case where the information is not yet available, or you just haven't looked in the right place yet. You might need to table this issue for a while to work on other things, but come back to it periodically. It's surprising how many are resolved by revisiting them later. Sometimes they just haven't been digitized yet. For more information on flattening brick walls, here are some resources I find very helpful. Dr. Thomas W. Jones, Mastering Genealogical Proof. He explains many aspects of analyzing information in genealogy. Cindy's List. She has a special topic for, quote, hit a brick wall, with more than 70 links for helpful resources. Elizabeth Shawn Mills has some wonderful resources for evaluating evidence, which can help with your brick walls, such as her blogs at historicpathways.com or her book, Citing History Sources from Artifacts to Cyberspace. And don't forget Google. You can always Google genealogy brick walls or similar terms to find more online. I also use this search term on YouTube to find videos, including many by well-known organizations and genealogists. Remember that you are often your own worst enemy when it comes to creating brick walls. Be careful as you proceed, and when you get stuck, remember to go back over everything. Open your mind and try to think of some new approach to the problem. You might be surprised how often this works. Worst case, document what you have and set it aside for a while, but do come back to it. Well, that's it for today. Join me for the next genealogy lab as we explore using mapping tools to track migration. Stay curious. This is Diana Chrisman Smith, and I'll see you for my lab next time.
You've been inside the Genealogy Lab with Diana Chrisman Smith, where every clue, every record, and every story brings us one step closer to knowing who we are. Stay curious and stay tuned for more from Preservation Oaks.
And now, back to Preservation Oaks.
Welcome back to Preservation Oaks. I love the Genealogy Lab segments with Diana Chrisman Smith. That was a good one about how to break through those stubborn brick walls in your family history. Diana has a real gift for turning complex research challenges into something clear and manageable, and we're lucky to have her here, and I hope her insights are helping you move your own story forward. If there's something you'd like her to explore in a future segment, let us know at preservationoaks@gmail.com. I'm your host, Sean Radcliff, and today we're joined by Betsy Bowers and Katy Lewis from Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park in Lakewood, Colorado. Let's jump back in. Welcome back, folks.
Thanks for having us back.
Betsy, Katy, what's been your personal paths and how did it guide each of you to your current positions within the organization?
Well, Sean, I love this question because I've always had, because of my mother, a love for museums. I grew up in Cleveland, and she just loved the Cleveland Art Museum. And it was kind of interesting. While my friends were busy going to maybe parks or beaches with their families, my mom used a wheelchair, and she found that the Cleveland Museum of Art was one of the most accessible places at a time in history where accessibility was not a concern. It was before the Disabilities Act. So it was nice for her to have a place where she could take her kids without needing help from my dad. So that's where my love started. And then when I went to college to get a business degree, I got diverted and found that those art history classes, which were much more in keeping with my interests. So from there, I ended up by chance in Washington, D.C., and was able to use the Smithsonian Institution, got to familiar with history and natural history and art through working at the Smithsonian with both little children, but also later in my career with training teachers how to use the artifacts with little kids and just as an educational tool. From there, I was lucky enough to attend the George Washington Museum Education Program, and that gave me some great opportunities to later teach. I was a professor at George Washington University, helping people learn and think about the importance of artifacts and history. From there, did some leadership consulting, and that was a nice tie-in to this role that I currently have as the director of, a fairly, I think, small to medium-sized municipal museum. So I really love museums and appreciative that they have the opportunity to spend every day here.
Oh, thank you for that. That's a great background. Thank you for sharing that. Katy?
Yes, my mom also had a strong influence on my early love of museums. She was a first grade teacher, and she would plan these trips. She and my dad liked to travel, so we would travel all over the West. I grew up in California, and she would always pick museums wherever we would go. And I love them. I liked learning about the people who lived in different places and how they lived and what they wore and what their houses looked like. And I had decided when I went to school that I would get an accounting degree because that seemed very, very reasonable. And my grandfather was an accountant, and so trying to follow in his footsteps. And I always like to tell people I tried it out, and I tried very hard, and I both disliked it and was very bad at it. And so I ended up needing to change my major, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I took summer school, and I took an anthropology class, and I loved it. It was that look back again into how people lived and how we got to where our culture is today. And so I decided I wanted to do that. And then I had to figure out what to do with that. And so I looked into a few different options, and I don't think I had realized at the time when I was growing up what jobs were out there for museums. I hadn't realized that you could work in a museum. Like, that was a job. It sounded so fun and so cool. And so I ended up going to school out here at University of Denver and just stayed. That was where my network was and where a lot of my knowledge base was. And I did a bunch of different things in Colorado. And so I started out with collections work, but then sort of transitioned into education programming for a while, moved out to the western slope of Grand Junction, and then moved back to Denver and worked at really large organizations. I supported museum gift shop sales at the Denver Art Museum, but then I also worked at really small organizations. So I assisted with collections work and visitor services, front desk staffing for Golden, for Aurora. And so I really got a base for knowing how municipal museums worked and how important local history is. And as I mentioned earlier, local history is really a microcosm. You can see the impacts from the larger national history and state history having those influences on local history. And those are the things people are really experiencing day to day. And I loved that piece. And so when this position at Lakewood came open, I've been here just over 13 years. And this position used to be a combination. Now it's primarily exhibits and collections because we've got a full-time educator who runs our classes and field trips. and other programs. But at the time, we were still growing, the museum was. And so I was able to handle collections, exhibits, and education because of my background. And I loved that you could see and experience and have some influence on how the synergy with all of those things, how all those things worked together, because you absolutely can see that within museums. The artifacts that you have, the history you have, can kind of point you in the direction of where you want to go with exhibits or programming. And then your programmers, they can have a say in how you display what artifacts you have. What's the best way to interpret those to people to get your visitors interested and get them interacting with the history that you have.
Fantastic. What a wonderful background you have. That's great. Lakewood, you're lucky to have such qualified, experienced, educated professionals that are really preserving your history, preserving your artifacts, and protecting it. Thank you both. Appreciate that.
Thank you. It takes a whole team, Sean. We have a staff of 6, and all of them are incredibly experienced and have great expertise.
You guys are rocking it, I'll tell you. Are there any upcoming events or exhibitions that you think the community will find particularly engaging?
Oh, yes. You mentioned earlier our museum 50th anniversary. We are throwing a birthday party for the museum. It will happen on August 1st, which is also Colorado Day. On August 1st, 1976 was the year and the day 50 years ago that the museum opened. And so we wanted to honor that and kind of commemorate the history of the museum itself with a birthday party. So that will happen from 4 to 8 p.m. We'll have music, we'll have cake, of course. We'll have some programs and demonstrations. All of the historic buildings will be open. It will be a free event. And that coincides with the opening of the 50 Years of Heritage Lakewood exhibit, which tells the story.
Fantastic. Is there plenty of parking for people?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
That's a trick question. We really do struggle. We do struggle with our parking situation, especially for our larger events, Sean. But it's we continue to problem solve, and we bring in shuttles and make it work.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, because that free birthday party, that's going to be great for you guys. Excellent.
I want to add on to another event, though, kind of related to the 50th anniversary. Every first Saturday in June, we have what we call our annual Rock and Block party. And it's usually themed around a decade. And this year's theme is going to tie specifically to 1976, which was the year that the Eagles' greatest hits came out. So we, of course, have a tribute band for the Eagles. Oh, cool. We're going to be playing movie on our amphitheater hill. It's going to be a night at the museum, so very much for families. And we have a lot of very low-key, fun family activities at that free event also, which is taking place that first Saturday in June. So we try to mix it up and offer free things, but we also have some paid-for events as well.
Yeah, you have a very cool and professional amphitheater. I saw pictures of that on the web as well. It's just beautiful.
It is beautiful, especially on those summer nights.
Yeah, very cool. Hey, I'd like to congratulate you guys for having a very well-documented master plan for Heritage Lakewood. That's really nice to see, and I don't see that very often. I've probably seen 3 organizations tops that have a well-documented master plan for several years out. What changes do you foresee for the museum's involvement in the community over the next few years?
Sean, thanks for noticing that master plan. It was really a group effort. A lot of community engagement informed that. And I actually came to work for the organization the same year that was developed. That master plan covers 2017 to 2027. And that guidance that a master plan provides really makes the work feel meaningful, because we're achieving these goals that have been identified by the community. And some of those, I think, include things like just the restoration of the site and the types of classes that we're offering and the various events that we're providing. And all of that is very much informed by public input. So that's been really useful as we've made some decisions about the growth of the museum. But, there are also those outside factors that aren't taken into account necessarily in the museum plan. For example, we have a housing area that's just being built a little bit north of us within walking. It's literally a stone's throw. And we imagine that's really going to increase our walk-up visitation. We already have a lot of walkers using the park, but that type of thing is going to expand our visitation by a good bit. The museum is an interesting model because, as we've made note of, we're part of the larger Belmar Park and we're completely unfenced. So although our buildings are not open 24/7, the site itself allows for access and easy and free access. So we're looking forward to increased visitation for sure. And then thinking about those long-term goals, I'm really very much invested in making sure that we're keeping in mind the long-term sustainability of these buildings. As you made note of earlier, to maintain this many historic structures requires a lot of forethought and a lot of prioritizing. We have some windows that need to be, attended to on the 1930s house. And then also same goes for the country school. And those projects are incredibly expensive and require a lot of cooperation and communication between the different departments within the city because we get a lot of support from them on those types of decisions.
Now, do you guys take donations from the public?
We absolutely do. We certainly have our old-fashioned, acrylic box that sits outside our permanent exhibit that people will drop, $5 into every now and then, but by no means is it required. And we also take donations online through the website. A little bit tricky to access because you have to get yourself logged in, but we do appreciate and count on donations to some extent.
Fantastic. That'll help with the master plan. All right.
Right.
That's really great.
And I think it helps a lot when the community sees where you're going and then they want to invest and try to support. Because if they don't know that one of the things that we're trying to do is to, create signage across the site, then I think it seems a mystery. We try hard not to have things be a mystery when working with the city residents.
Well, that master plan is available on your website. Anybody can view it and go in and donate. And thank you for doing that.
Absolutely.
Can you share any funny or intriguing stories from your organization's history that stand out to you?
I can share a brief one. I think Betsy probably has more too. One story that I heard that happened a little while before I started relates to moving one of the historic structures. We have a vintage water tower that was built in the early 1900s. And it was moved from a local farm. And initially, when the staff and volunteers here went to the farm to try and move it, they brought a small crane. They knew it was going to be, kind of heavy. And they tried to lift it with the small crane and it started bending the crane. And they could not figure out there's no reason it should be that heavy. So they got a bigger crane and they opened up the top of the water tower to see what was going on. And apparently lots and lots of birds had just been living in there for probably decades.
Oh.
And so they had built nests. There was bird food and poop. And it was apparently just full of birds. And
Wow.
So they ended up having to kind of move everything and clean it out before they were able to move it with this then larger crane. So you never know, your expectations when you go into, especially moving a structure or a building, you never know what exciting things or challenges might present themselves.
No kidding. That is crazy.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the people that had to clean that out, oh my God.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yes.
But you had fertilizer for a while.
Mhm.
There's the lemonade. I'll share a quick story. It's more on the intriguing side to me than the funny side. But as I mentioned, when I first arrived in 2017, one of the things that struck me was the really incredible tractor collection that we have here. So we have a number of tractors and a few of them were running at the time. And one of our volunteers who works with an organization called FRAPA, Front Range Antique Power Association, had a really fun idea that they were going to be approaching the Colorado School of Mines students to partner on the restoration of one of their, I think it was a corn binder, and was wondering if we wanted to see if they were interested in restoring one of the other tractors that hadn't been running for a while. And so it was pretty exciting to have opportunity to partner with the School of Mines to bring back to life this Caterpillar tractor. I'm pretty sure it was from the 1920s, but I'm sure Katy will correct me if I'm wrong.
Thought it was from 1927, but we found out through research it's 1930.
Okay, so I was off by just a little bit. And the students really literally brought back this very, at the time it was rusty, and they completely removed the rust and renovated it. And for their final capstone project, they drove the thing across the campus, and it was featured in the final capstone show, if you will. And I was just really proud that we were able to, have that partnership. And it was just amazing what these students could do. And I think they too are quite proud. And in the end, we'll be mentioning our interpretive signage project, but we have 3 sections in our signage efforts. And one is the agricultural area, and the emblem that we have representing our agricultural area is this Caterpillar tractor. So really fun project, and we have a lot of things like that going on. So happy to share that one.
Oh, that's a very cool story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, you guys, because of your proximity to Denver, you're just west of Denver. People can fly right into the Denver airport. They can then roll on over to Lakewood and go to your organization and your park and see everything there. Because of that, you probably get, I'm just guessing, but probably thousands of visitors a year. What are some standout experiences or feedback you've received from visitors that have particularly resonated with you?
Oh, this is a story I love to tell. Our permanent exhibit gallery in our main visitor center, we redid the exhibit in 2019, and we had recently been gifted as a donation a jukebox. And it had run for years in a local Lakewood restaurant and bar. And we found a guy who could fix it. There's a jukebox guy who fixes those locally. And he got it running. We got donations of records from him and our volunteers and the donor of the jukebox. And so we got it running, and people can play it for free. They don't have to put in any change in the exhibit space. And all of the records are time period appropriate to the jukebox. So it was built in 1958. And so we've got 1950s, 60s, and 70s records in there. And people love it. They go in and play it. You see kids, you see school kids, you see adults, you see older folks, families, and they pick their favorite song. And I love this, that they look so carefully. They pick their favorite song, they play the song. And numerous times we have seen people dancing in the exhibit gallery, and it warms my heart. It makes me so happy that people have this sensory experience that they can have in a museum space that reminds them of clearly like a beautiful memory that they've had. And so I just love to see people dancing to the jukebox.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, those jukeboxes are cool things.
I'm going to add on to the sensory point that Katy made, because one of the things I love is when we get visitors from everywhere, those that are actually take the tour and walk into the different buildings. So in the agricultural area, we have one particular building that's representing the 1930s era, and it's a farmhouse. And I love the initial moment that our visitors walk in. So often I'm struck by how they immediately connect the smell of the space with their own grandmother's building or their own grandmother's house, and or some relative that lived and has a building, has a house from a while back. So I think that's one of the really special things about our site is just all of this sensorial kinds of experiences people take in without even really knowing that that's what's happening.
Fantastic. Now, speaking of displays, in your 2003 Visitor Center Museum, what kinds of displays or exhibits are available for visitors to experience at your facility right now?
Sure. We have changing displays, and those change out twice a year. So we try to think of different themes that, we'll receive input from the community about something they might like to see, or we've got to focus on a certain anniversary or a project that we're working on. And so those exhibits are in our temporary gallery and also in the hallway space. We do like to have additional smaller displays that can mean we can be a little bit more flexible about what we can show. Or if we don't have quite as many artifacts to tell a story, we can still tell that story on a smaller scale. And so the current exhibit right now is called Who Lives Here? And we wanted to showcase, as you mentioned at the top of the podcast, it's the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It's also the 150th anniversary of Colorado gaining statehood and the 50th anniversary of our museum starting. So we wanted to focus on all of those time periods and figure out who was living in Lakewood specifically at the time and give them kind of their moment. Because sometimes, talking mostly about 20th century history, we don't talk a lot about those earlier history time periods, but there absolutely were some impacts from the earlier time periods. So in 1776, you have Ute people living here, you have people from other tribes coming in, you start seeing people from Spain moving into the area looking to settle or looking to convert people. You see fur traders. Later on, in closer to 1876, you've already seen some people trying to come here for gold mining, silver mining, and you start seeing people settle and farm in the area. And then moving into that 1976 time period, that's when you see the bicentennial, centennial celebrations and the start of so many museums, especially in Colorado and our area. Many of the museums in our area started that year. And then tying that into today, because of course we're still seeing changes in demographics, in the age of people who live in Lakewood, people of different backgrounds, speaking different languages, bringing their own cultural experiences and backgrounds with them. So we thought it was really interesting to try to find the differences, because those differences are important, but also the similarities and what people came together to create in the community. Because they did come together to create things like education programs. So the schools were one of the earliest community organizations to start in growing settlements. Fire departments, we focus on those. We focus on the transportation changes from horses to those interurban cars we're talking about, to cars, and how that impacted our area. So all of these things tell the story of Lakewood through time. And so we were pretty excited to showcase that display. And we have some corresponding displays in the historic structures in the windows so that people can experience that history. We're talking about building preservation as well. People can experience that history even when the buildings aren't open. Betsy, do you want to talk about the Birds of Belmar display?
Yeah, I'd love to. And then I also, while you're talking about the site itself, want to also interject the visitor center, where these exhibits that Katy is talking about are currently on view, is open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 4. And one thing I wanted to make sure to share was that we have been working for the past 3 years also on a site-wide interpretive signage project. And so that installation was just completed this month in April. And now we have across the site beautiful new interpretive signage that are presenting information about each and every historic structure in both English and Spanish. And especially fun for Katy and I was developing the content to put in QR codes, additional information into the QR codes for those that are really wanting to get more in depth. And so the final large information kiosk went in just last week, and I do feel like that's accessible all day long and into the evening. Although we are accessible 24/7, we do like to let people know that our actual hours are from like 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. We don't like people wandering the site at night, but we do have access 24/7. So I wanted to make sure to highlight that new signage project because we're excited about that. And yes, the Birds of Belmar hallway exhibit is fun to talk about because about 3 years ago, a member of the public just came and knocked on our administrative office door and had discovered a book in his nearby library called The Birds of Belmar. And it was created by our organization under our previous name, Lakewood Heritage Center, and was wondering if we had any for sale. But in fact, we haven't had those available for a long time. And that inspired us to create a second edition. And we worked with him and other members of the community to update the Birds of Belmar book, which is now available in our museum store. And Katy did a beautiful exhibit in collaboration a little bit with Bear Creek Lake Park, which is also part of the Lakewood Community Resources Department. And we have some taxidermy ducks and some beautiful photographs that the community has taken. So I do love that hallway exhibit, and I think that's on display for just a couple more months.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for mentioning it. I want to encourage everyone listening to go to the Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park website. Take a look at the exhibit link on the website. There's photos there. It's very creatively done. It's very clean. It's bright main permanent exhibit area. Really well done. I think you'll like it a lot. Betsy, Katy, I really like the idea of the magnetic exhibit. Can you tell us more about that?
I'm going to jump in, Katy, and then you can add on. But developing that exhibit in 2019, we worked with a phenomenal company called Quatrefoil out of Maryland, and they helped us with both the content and the design. And it was important to us to be able to offer families, interactive opportunities. We didn't want it to be a strictly hands-off exhibit. And the magnetic component ties back to the importance of water in the community and the ditches that were necessary for folks to maintain their farms. So the magnetic component is all about how you have to connect the different pieces to line up with where you want the water to ultimately land. And the concept is fun, but it's been funny to actually watch folks implement it because the magnets are actually very strong and it's very difficult to move them and slide them around. So it's kind of a bit of manipulation rather than, thinking about how you might want to get the water where it goes. It ends up being more about where you can get the magnet to move. So that was really fun to create that exhibit. But Katy also might have some thoughts about the exhibit as well.
The interactives, I think, are a really lovely addition. There's a couple of videos and an apple weighing area, and there's some really great additions that makes the exhibit accessible to a good number of ages.
Yeah, it's a really great exhibit. Now, I'm sorry to interrupt, folks, but it's time for us to take a break for a few minutes.
Okay, sounds good. It's time is flying.
Sure is. Listeners, we'll be right back after an important message about all the excellent classes and events at Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park.
Looking for something more than just a visit? Looking for an experience? At Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park, history becomes something you can take part in. Throughout the year, Heritage Lakewood offers many varied and engaging events, educational programs, and hands-on experiences designed for all ages. From seasonal festivals to interactive workshops. From school programs to community events, there's always something happening. Learn traditional skills. Explore historic crafts. Engage with interpreters who bring the past into the present.
Whether you're a student, a lifelong learner, or simply someone who enjoys meaningful experiences, Heritage Lakewood invites you to be a part of the story. And for families, it's an opportunity to connect across generations, to learn together, and to create lasting memories. Stay connected, stay engaged, and discover what's coming up next. Visit lakewoodco.gov/heritage or search for Heritage Lakewood on Facebook.
Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park. Don't just learn history, live it.
This is Ken Funk, historian at the Sandy Historical Society, and I enjoyed being a guest on Preservation Oaks with Sean Radcliff.
Always stimulating. That's what happens when you listen to the Preservation Oaks podcast, and especially on my episode. I'm Kathy Harvey, the president from the Walthall County Historical Society.
You're listening to Preservation Oaks, where new episodes are created for you every 2 weeks. That's 26 episodes per season. Let me see, that's like 182 in dog episodes. Right?
And now, back to Preservation Oaks.
Welcome back to Preservation Oaks. I'm your host, Sean Radcliff, and we're here today with Betsy Bowers and Katy Lewis from the Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park, located in Lakewood, Colorado. Let's pick up where we left off. I'm learning a lot. Boy, what a place. Nice place. Thank you and welcome back.
Glad to be back.
Thank you. Yeah.
So how regularly do you update your exhibits, and what's the approach to selecting new themes and artifacts?
We update all of our exhibitions, the ones in the temporary gallery, the hallway, and the historic structures. We try to update those twice a year. And usually we try to pick, like we're doing this year, pick an anniversary to focus on, or if there's a project we're working on. For example, when the firefighting collection was donated to the museum, they did a focus on that collection for the exhibition that year. Similarly, when we were working on photographing our large textiles, we did an exhibit all about that. So it just depends kind of on what we're working on and what the public is interested in seeing.
Okay. And are you accepting donations, or can you talk about your museum's collection management policies and procedures and how you care for your artifacts?
Sure, absolutely. We try to follow best practices when accepting and caring for the artifacts. So we have a storage area that is temperature and humidity controlled. We try to house things in acid-free boxes and acid-free storage. So we keep it around for as long as we can. And we similarly try to have enough space to keep all of the donations that the community gives us safe and accessible if people want to use them for research or if we need to use them for displays. So we are accepting donations, but we are limited, as many museums are, by our space and storage. So we follow our collections management policy, which has gone through some checks from the community resources department, and from ourselves, of course, to figure out what makes sense to keep within what pertains most closely to the history we're trying to tell, what fits within that master planning process. So we naturally focus on 20th century Lakewood, and we do collect many different types of things. We collect photographs, archives, books, and three-dimensional artifacts. But within those artifacts, there's everything from textiles like clothes, rugs, curtains, furniture, tractors. And so we try to, within that, focus on the things that we can tell the story that pertains most to the history of Lakewood. And of course, there's a lot of diverse stories within Lakewood history and from people who are moving into Lakewood today. So it ends up being kind of a diverse set of artifacts. But for example, we try to find toys that were popular in the 1920s and the 1950s for lots of different kids, and clothes that people wore during those time periods. And so all of those things can help tell the story, but we also have to make sure that we have a good way of taking care of those things and an opportunity to display those. We obviously cannot display everything all at one time. We have 45,000 artifacts. So part of that is getting those items online where people can see them 100% of the time if they want to research. But we want to make sure that they have a place that they can be seen in person as well, if we can.
Can you highlight any recent restoration efforts or preservation projects for your exhibits?
Katy mentioned earlier a couple, the Caretaker's Cottage and the Peerless gas station. The Peerless gas station just opened in 2024, and that was a pretty major restoration of, as she mentioned, it was almost like a metal box. It was a pretty small space, but it shares the story of the mid-century transportation growth on Colfax and across the country. And so that Peerless gas station, when we opened that, we had quite a fun, big, grand party that a lot of people joined in on. But it was about a year in really making that restoration come full circle. And then Katy did a great job of adding components that brought it to life with some, interpretive stories and such. So that's been a pretty significant restoration as of late. We certainly have more that are on tap for future when we have the funding. So back to those donations, we have a really fun a little train that comes from a mall called the Westland Mall train. So back in the day when you'd go to the mall and these little trains would take you from one store to the other, has been a very popular item here that we're looking forward to restoring in the next year or so.
Oh, that's going to be great. Yeah, the kids
Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the most valuable ancient or popular exhibit or artifact in your collection?
It's called Car 25, and we were talking earlier about the interurban streetcar system. And Car 25 is very unique because it's one of the last of its kind, one of the last fully intact electric streetcars from the Denver metro area that's still running. And it started running on a 13-mile rail line between Denver, Lakewood, and Golden in 1911. And that was back when there were, 300 miles of tracks, 250 streetcars. Yeah. But the thing is massive. It's 48 feet long, 29 tons, big steel frame with this beautiful wooden paneling. And it seats 52 people. And even though trolley service was discontinued in 1950, the interurban car was purchased by the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club, and they used it for excursions and displays and then decided to restore it. So they started that in 1988, and then there was kind of a collaboration after that with the West Corridor Historical Rail Cooperative in the city of Lakewood, and the car was eventually transferred to the city of Lakewood's ownership. And so now it lives at the Denver Federal Center, so just a short drive away from our Heritage Lakewood site. And we actually get it out and drive it with our partners at the Denver Trolley on an annual basis. So it doesn't get out quite as much as we'd like yet, but it's amazing to see it, and people can ride on it, and it's fully restored. So there's these beautiful vintage lights and advertisements inside, these rattan seats that move. And so people love to see that, and it's an amazing experience. It's very immersive.
Oh, that's very cool. I bet it's beautiful. Wow.
It is.
It is.
Wow, that's cool. And do you dress in period clothing when you go for a ride in it?
The conductors dress up as kind of vintage conductors with hats and everything.
Wow, and once in a while, our visitors that attend the open house will dress up. It's very fun to see.
Oh, that's very cool. Thanks for sharing that. Now, being a curator, Katy, I'm sure you have some artifacts that are near and dear to you. Can you share some memorable artifacts or records donated to your organization and explain how they add value to your collection?
Sure. I mentioned earlier the firefighting collection that was donated a number of years ago. And the original fire truck for the Lakewood Mount Air Fire Department was also donated to the museum. It was built in 1937. And it was the first fire truck that fire department, which served central Lakewood at the time in the 1930s, that was their first fire truck that they purchased. First fire department that was officially organized, all volunteer. And the really interesting thing about that collection is that it spans 3D artifacts, and there's these really amazing records that show the schedule of the firefighters and dispatches. Up until the 1950s, all the dispatches went through the fire chief's house. His wife was the dispatcher. And so it's this really amazing community story early on. And then it transitions later on. And the reason we have this wide range is because Gene Hofferber, who donated a good amount of the collection, his father was a volunteer firefighter, and then he himself became a volunteer firefighter and then a paid firefighter once the volunteer program had to transition to paid when the city started growing. And so, and we have donations of helmets and, jackets and badges from other firefighters and fire chiefs who served as well. And so it's a really extensive and complete collection, and it shows this really nice range of time and the changes that happen in tandem with the city developing. So it tells a really complete story, which you don't always get as a curator, and you don't always get as a museum. So it's nice to see that.
Yeah, that's very
And
cool.
I'd like to add on to that it's, one of those collections that has to stay a little bit buried a lot of the time, including the beautiful fire truck we have. It lives most of the time in our big red barn that isn't easily accessible to the public.
Okay.
But we do have plans from that master plan to build a replica of the original fire station so that we'll be able to put these amazing artifacts on view, and they'll be more accessible to the public. So we're looking forward to that. Maybe might be ambitious, but we're hoping in the next 5 years.
Oh, that's really cool. That's going to be so cool for everybody.
It will be really exciting.
Great job. Now, you guys mentioned digitization of documents and photos, ephemera, if you will. What steps is your organization taking to digitize those things, and how will this improve accessibility for future generations?
So we are definitely working on digitization. We are actually very close to completing a full inventory of the 45,000 artifacts that are in the museum collection, which is really exciting. And so while we're rehousing those physical artifacts and documenting the data that goes along with them, we want to make sure that those also get online, because we're keeping track of that information for the museum, for ourselves, but we also want to make that it can be publicly accessible, and we believe that it should be. And part of how we're managing that is we were recently awarded grants from a couple of different local organizations, the Denver Foundation's Greenwood Fund, and CRAB, which is the Colorado Historic Records Advisory Board. And they gave us money specifically to preserve and digitize a couple of our collections, one related to maps in our Lakewood area and one related to photographs taken by a local newspaper photographer named Stanley Zamonsky. And he took those in the 60s. And the 1960s sounds so recent, but there's still really valuable information in those photographs that relate to community events and activities. And like I mentioned earlier, the nice thing about it being a little more recent is there's still people around that could say, oh, that's my grandmother, or, that was my best friend back in the 1960s, and this is what we were doing, and this is where we were. So drawing on that community support and knowledge is a really big piece of what we're hoping to do with the digitization projects as well.
That's really cool. What software are you using for your collections management?
We use Past Perfect Web Edition, which I know a lot of history organizations use. So we've got already, they have built into the web edition an online search feature. So that digitization is making its way online immediately after we upload it to our database, and people can easily search for it. It's keyword searchable. So it's a great system to use. We'll evaluate as we finish the inventory if it's still the best system for our organization, or if we need to grow or expand in any different directions. But it's been working great as we finish that inventory and put everything online.
Wow, that's really cool.
I have to congratulate Katy and her colleague Tori for getting this project done in 2025. It really wasn't even part of their work plan, but it took the whole year to really put it together, and she did an amazing job.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, Betsy, is that search feature of your artifacts available right now on your website?
Should be, right, Katy?
Yes, it absolutely is.
Wow, that is so cool. You guys are ahead of the curve for a lot of organizations, let me tell you. That's great.
Thank you.
Can you tell everybody about the funding sources for your organization and what financial goals you're working toward this year?
Sure, I can touch on that. It's really important to understand where we fit within the larger city to understand our funding. But the city of Lakewood has a community resources department that is made up of things like parks and golf, and the Heritage, Culture, and Arts Division, which our organization is part of, falls within that community resources department. And so our budget, which is roughly $500,000, is an important part of how we manage our funding is through revenue generating sorts of activities. So that would include everything from, the classes that we offer. We, for example, offer cider pressing in the fall, and we offer blacksmithing. And so those types of activities do help support the revenue generation. But in addition, I think part of what makes us sustainable is our rental program. So we have people able to use our site, everything from that amphitheater, which works great for weddings and whatnot, to our calving barn, which people rent for, kids' birthday parties and the country school. And these spaces have been intentionally designed to accommodate the rentals. So there's sort of a separation between the artifacts themselves and the community that does use these. We also have a museum store, which is, generates revenue as well. And I'm thinking, let's see, have I put everything in there, Katy? Oh, important. I did want to make sure to point out, I'm sure the other organizations that you've spoken with here in the Denver region have made mention of the SCFD, which stands for the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, which is a really cool concept. I came here from back east and was impressed to learn of this voter approved 7-county Denver metro area tax district that collects I think it's 0.1% sales tax to fund over 300 cultural and scientific organizations in the area. And Heritage Lakewood and the Heritage Culture and the Arts Division are lucky enough to be part of that funding group. So that's been helpful, but also we are required to bring in some revenue. So those are our main sources.
Yeah, that's very cool. Thanks for sharing that. That's a great thing that a lot of communities don't have. You're very lucky to have that.
Absolutely. I thought when I first heard of it, it was incredibly foresightful and thoughtful to create that at the stage that it was created.
Now, you've mentioned a couple of annual events and festivals that you do, and I know you're always doing them. I mean, I see it on the website, on your website. You guys are so rich in festivals and events. It's just crazy how hard you work. Are there any significant annual events or festivals that your organization hosts that impact?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We do have so many activities, as you mentioned, that really bring life to the site and give us a chance to open our buildings to the public. Everything. We're also fortunate enough to have one of our staff members is specifically tasked with planning and implementing these community events. So that helps a lot. And I think our summer concert series that takes place out on the amphitheater hill that looks out on the Rockies and brings music, local artists mostly in once a week, is very popular. Those tickets just went on sale and are selling great guns. It's very popular for summer evening event. We also host a couple free events a year, including the Rock and Block Party, which I mentioned earlier, and then a mayor's tree lighting, which we refer to as Lakewood Lights. That always brings in the community, and our buildings lit with holiday lighting and open to the public. But most exhausting and exciting, and I think well loved by the community, are our cider days. Our 2 days in the fall, first weekend in October,
where the community comes together and celebrates the apple harvest, if you will. And we have everything from tractor pulling to this year we'll have a trebuchet contest where people will fling apples into the shrubbery. I suppose it's a little experimental. We can't wait to see how that goes.
Yeah, it's gonna be cool.
Trick pigs perform at cider days, so it's really quite a wonderful mix of community and family and fun.
Gosh, I wish I would be there for the trebuchet. Those are wonderful.
Yes. And actually, it's a local high school that's helping us get that together. So we're looking forward to working with these students who are excited to join us and give a hand.
As Betsy mentioned, we see thousands of people who might not otherwise come to experience the history. So I think that's really the key with these special events, is that people are coming to have a more immersive experience, or they're thinking about it in a different ways, like a fun social day out with their families, and maybe not even thinking of the history.
That's right.
But we're gonna introduce it to them as they visit. So it's a great opportunity for us too.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. That's the key. You've hit upon that key, and that's really important. Betsy, Katy, what partnerships do you have with local schools to help teach students about the area's history?
I'm going to jump in on that and say that it's been really exciting to see our field trip program expand over recent years. We, for example, day after tomorrow, have a school group of second graders coming. And when these school groups arrive, they, bring in 2 busloads of kids, and our volunteers support the experience, and they are able to visit every single one of our buildings. It's almost like they can, get a glimpse at a full century of time by just visiting our buildings. So once a school visits on a field trip, we find they will come back year after year. So those are some really great partnerships that we have with our schools. We also have a wonderful relationship with a 4-H. They house their bee colony on our site and stop by regularly to care for their bees. And that's been really great to see those kids, visiting the site for that reason and getting familiar with all that we do. And in the past, we've supported National History Day, which is mostly through our staff trying to support the judging process. So many different ways. It depends on what the school's needs are. We try to create an experience that accommodates what they're most interested in.
Oh, very cool. Man, you're always doing work. 4-H, that's great. I like 4-H.
That's been fun.
I want to give you an opportunity to talk about volunteers. What volunteer roles does your organization offer for community members interested in getting involved?
Oh, I love that question, Sean. We have such an active and vibrant volunteer community. Believe it or not, we have over 200 volunteers that make up the Heritage Culture and Arts Division. And within that context, we have here at Heritage Lakewood our tour guides that, help both with field trips, but as well as with small tours. We have our gardeners that take care of our Victory Garden at the 1920s house, and a sustainability garden that grows vegetables for the volunteer community, the staff community, as well as others in the community. So they do a lot of work in the summer. We have hospitality volunteers, maintenance volunteers, but I'd love for Katy to tell you a little bit more about the collections volunteers, because she and her colleague Tori do such a great job with giving them meaningful hands-on work that makes a huge difference. So Katy, why don't you jump in and talk about them?
Of course. We have 10 collections volunteers who come regularly every week. And our assistant curator, Tori, has been really proactive about creating projects for folks that build on their interests. So we have folks who are young people who work in, like one of our folks works in clothing stores and thrift shops. And so she loves vintage textiles. So she's helping photograph our textile collection. And we have a young gentleman who is interested in the Vietnam War. So he's going to start work on digitizing our Vietnam photographs. And we have also retired volunteers who have worked in the Jefferson County courts, who have worked for the National Park Service. And so finding out their histories and their own personal backgrounds helps figure out their interests, so you can figure out what they might like to do, and then they have ownership. They really seem to enjoy the projects that they're working on, and they make great suggestions for how to make our projects better. So their expertise has really been invaluable. They've done everything from digitizing archives and photos to researching Ancestry.com about our local families, cataloging and photographing numerous objects. So we absolutely couldn't do what we do without them. And I like to think they have a lot of fun, and we really enjoy having them there too.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Betsy, Katy, could you tell us about any significant publications your organization has produced and their impact on the community?
I'm going to mention just briefly that in 2019, when the city turned 50, we did produce a book called A Half Century of Transformation that's specifically about Lakewood between 1969 and 2019, and that can easily be purchased through our museum store. I did mention also the Birds of Belmar book, which we created a second edition for. That one's a lot of fun, and the marketing department helped us do an add-on coloring book, so that's been a lot of fun. But I really want to hand this over to Katy because she just in the past month put together an article for the American Association of State and Local History, and I'd love for her to be able to just feature that briefly.
Sure, that will come out at the end of this year, and it's all about how to use artifacts that are in your collection for educational purposes while still keeping them safe for the future. So it's a really nice focus on something that is of concern for a lot of museum folks, where we want to keep the things safe, but the whole reason we're here is to show the things to people and have people interact with them. So we focus on some of our textiles, on how we use our tractors for hay rides, and then how we were able to kind of leverage the opening of the Peerless gas station for some really interesting programming and activities, and the grand opening that happened. So we were really excited to be featured in ASLH in their magazine this year.
Yeah, congratulations. That's great. Great work. All right. Thank you very much. I'd like to provide listeners with the contact information for the organization once again. Their website is www.lakewoodco.gov/heritage. You can find them on Facebook at Heritage Lakewood if you search for that. Their phone number is 303-987-7850. You can email them at hlbp@lakewoodco.gov, and their address is 801 South Yarrow Street, Lakewood, Colorado, 80226. I know you guys have a beautiful website. It's really well managed. Can you talk about your website?
Our website actually has the online artifact database on it, which is a great resource, but it offers opportunities for people to register for classes. There's videos you can look at on there if you're interested in renting some of the spaces at Heritage Lakewood. But we also have a Facebook page, Instagram. I always think it's so funny when museums are going modern. So we talk about history, but we do it on these new platforms because that's how often people interact with the world these days. Yeah. And then the city of Lakewood offers YouTube videos as well. And some of those happen to be oral histories that either they've taken or the museum has taken over the years, and interviews with people about the history of the area. So there's lots of opportunities on the website to interact with the local history too.
Very cool. You're out there, you're everywhere. That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
What ongoing initiatives or pressing needs does your organization have that community members can support right now?
Well, I think that we are always looking for volunteer support, always looking for donations. I know Katy has been working on oral histories, and that process is labor intensive with things like transcriptions. So folks that might be interested in supporting us in those ways are always welcome to get in touch. Anybody with any expertise in preservation maintenance, we look to the community to even help with those kinds of things.
Fantastic. Thank you. Is there any additional message or important information you'd like to share with the community?
Well, Sean, I think that you're taking this time to talk to us has been so appreciated. And I would like to just make folks aware that museums really do have the potential to change lives. They can present perspectives that folks may not have ever considered before. It may not change minds, but it could certainly open up conversations that are really much needed, I think, and especially every day, but today. And to be able to share these experiences and new ideas with family members, they're just the right place to take your kids when you're trying to share with them new insight.
Very well said, Betsy. Thank you for that. So how do you measure the impact you have on visitors and the community? Do you use some form of management or metrics framework?
I'll jump in and just say that we use surveys. They're usually online options for all of our events and all of our educational programming so that we can kind of get some qualitative information as well as the quantitative information of us counting people and seeing where they're from. We do some tracking of zip codes and things like that for some of the, Betsy had mentioned earlier, SCFD programming and funding. But I think I'll let Betsy talk about how we use that feedback.
So I think that when we get the feedback, we convene, discuss it, and make some decisions about future programming, any issues of concern, and address those as a team. Try to come up with some solutions, not always perfect, but certainly it gets us further to where we're going. On a very practical note, we also measure success by meeting our revenue goals. If we've been able to, meet those identified budget numbers, we're feeling like something's gone right.
Betsy, Katy, I can't thank you enough for being on the program today. It's been enlightening to hear all that you and your organization do for your community. The conversation has been a pleasure. I'm so glad we got to connect. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, Sean, thank you very much for taking the time, and it's been a pleasure on our end as well.
And with that, we'll end our time with our guests, Betsy Bowers and Katy Lewis. Listeners, please stay tuned for my comments and wrap-up, which is coming up next. As we come to the close of today's episode, I'd like to take just a moment and invite you to reflect on where we've been. Not just Lakewood, Colorado, but across time itself. From the early farms and ranches that shaped Jefferson County, to the electric trolley lines that connected communities, to the families, workers, and dreamers who built lives in a place that continues to evolve even today. What we've experienced here isn't just history, it's continuity, it's legacy. Our guests for this episode have been Betsy Bowers and Katy Lewis from Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park. These consummate professionals are sincerely dedicated, eminently qualified, intelligent, knowledgeable, and capable individuals. And you heard that clearly throughout our conversation. They didn't just share facts, they shared meaning. They shared stories of perseverance, of community, of identity, and of a place that reflects the broader American experience in ways both subtle and profound. Betsy's leadership, Katy's deep curatorial insight, and the work of their entire team represent the very best of what local history organizations can be. And we're truly grateful to have had them here, guiding us through the living history of Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park, right in the heart of Jefferson County. What makes a place like this unforgettable are the human stories. The Beers sisters, young women who built a successful dairy farm after loss, showing resilience and determination in the early 20th century. Ethel, a Hispanic woman encouraged to take control of her future, who built her own business in a time when that path was not easily available to her. Families dancing to a restored jukebox, reconnecting not just with music, but with memory. Visitors stepping into a farmhouse and suddenly recognizing the smell of their grandmother's home, a moment where history becomes personal. These are the moments that matter. These are the reasons places like this must be preserved. Throughout this episode, we've heard about the incredible accomplishments of Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park, a 50-year legacy as a museum rooted in community effort and vision, a living history park that has rescued historic structures from demolition and given them new life, a collection of more than 45,000 artifacts, carefully cataloged, preserved, studied, and shared, a fully restored electric streetcar, connecting us directly to the transportation history of the region, innovative exhibits, interactive experiences, and interpretive signage that bring history to life for all generations. This is not passive preservation. This is active storytelling. But as we've also heard, preservation does not happen by accident. It requires support, partnership. It requires community. From restoring historic structures to maintaining aging buildings, to expanding exhibit space, to solving very real challenges like parking, accessibility, and long-term sustainability. This work depends on people who care. So if today's episode moved you, even just a little, consider supporting Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park. You can learn more, get involved, or plan your visit at their website www.lakewoodco.gov/heritage. You can search for them on Facebook at Heritage Lakewood. You can phone them at 303-987-7850. You can email them at hlbp@lakewoodco.gov. And their address, if you want to visit them, and I hope you do, is 801 South Yarrow Street, Lakewood, Colorado, 80226. Go visit, walk the grounds, step into the past and see how it still shapes the present. And before we close today, we would be remiss not to recognize that this is our Memorial Day episode. Memorial Day is not just a long weekend. It's a sacred moment of remembrance, a time to honor the men and women who gave their lives in service to this nation. Individuals whose sacrifices made possible the very communities we've been discussing today. Places like Lakewood, places like Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park, exist because generations before us believed in something greater than themselves. So today, as you reflect on history, take a moment to remember those who became part of it, not through preservation, but through sacrifice. History is not just found in textbooks. It lives in places like this, in restored buildings, in preserved artifacts, in stories passed from one generation to the next, and most importantly, in people who care enough to protect it. Our guests for this episode have been Betsy Bowers and Katy Lewis from Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park. To both of you, thank you for your dedication, for your professionalism, and for the incredible work you do to ensure that history is not lost, but lived. All right, I hope this information helps the audience understand how valuable Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park is to the community and what kinds of excellent services they have to offer. Heritage Lakewood Belmar Park is truly one of our nation's preservation oaks. Now let me tell you about the next episode of Preservation Oaks. Episode 123 will be a special episode entitled From Bootleggers to Bureaucracy, History of Crime, 1926 to 2026. In this special two-part episode, we trace the evolution of crime and crime fighting across the last century. From the bootleggers and gangsters of the 1920s to the rise of national enforcement, organized crime, and on to global financial systems. Part 1 explores how crime moved from the streets into institutions, and Part 2 takes us into the digital age, where crime becomes borderless, systems themselves become targets, and artificial intelligence begins to reshape the landscape. Tune in and discover how crime has evolved and what it reveals about the world we live in today. All right, that's a wrap for this episode. Music used today is from Cymbalbird, Dagored, Dan Leibowitz, Anouk, Andrew Vovichnia, Eugene Myers, Antracto, Track Tribe, and Anthem of Rain. Hey, this is Sean Radcliff. See you all next time on Preservation Oaks. And until then, keep on giving and keep on living the good life.
You can visit at www.microstreamradio.com. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted by Microstream Radio. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, reproduced, copied, or used anywhere without the written permission of Microstream Radio. Preservation Oaks starring Sean Radcliff originates in Salt Lake City, Utah. Be sure to join us for our next episode on your favorite podcast platform. This is Thaddeus Dillon speaking. Preservation Oaks has come to you through the worldwide podcast platform Podbean, and our home is preservationoaks.podbean.com. Hopefully you found today's episode useful, informative, and thought-provoking. If so, please like, follow, comment, and/or subscribe. Remember that being free means being free to be curious, and that historical and genealogical societies and museums allow us to discover the past, be free to explore, where curiosity opens every door. Thanks to everyone for listening. Stay cozy, curious, and keep exploring the incredible stories that shape our world. Remember to cherish and support the preservation of history in your own communities. The content of this program is provided for educational and informational purposes only. Some material included in this program may be copyrighted by third parties. However, under Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Act, the doctrine of fair use allows the limited use of copyrighted material without requiring permission from the rights holders when used for purposes such as education, criticism, commentary, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. These uses are legally permitted even if they might otherwise constitute infringement. If you wish to use copyrighted material from this program for purposes beyond fair use, you must obtain permission from the copyright owner. If you believe your copyrighted material has been used in this program in a way that does not qualify as fair use,